Hey everyone, how are we doing? I think we're at the home stretch of today, so we're probably standing in between here and happy hour, but thank you for your time. I'll introduce myself quickly and then I'll throw it over to you, Howard. I'm Kara Verholt, as mentioned. I made a fairly recent pivot from corporate marketer to consultant, so I'm on a little bit of a new journey myself, but I was a corporate or client-side marketer for about 15 years, started in startups and smaller stage, early stage companies, and then spent the last 10 years of my career working my way down the West Coast and working for very large organizations. I went from Amazon to the Walt Disney Company to the National Football League, where brand is, of course, paramount at those organizations. And then about a year and a half ago, left LA, relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, and in that practice has started my own marketing consulting firm. So I support clients through fractional CMO and marketing advisory services.
I like that. It's funny because I went the opposite direction. So I've been in business for 38 years. The first 10 years because our company broke the code of how to get things out of the Macintosh computer and generate more innovative solutions for Fortune 500 companies. So no one understood what we were doing except Apple, Xerox, Oracle, Disney, DreamWorks, Paramount, Columbia Pictures, Fox, ABC, CBS. So they all became our clients of how we were going to take them to go more global because of our quote-unquote solutions to the problems that they're facing and creating advertising and branding and design solutions. So the first 10 years, that's all I did with my companies. We helped out Fortune 500 companies get more known, literally generating billions of dollars for them. And then it hit me that I want to help out all size companies. So I changed my model where it was not just helping out and extending Fortune 500 companies with their brands, but also creating brands from scratch or upgrading brands. And so the last, oh gosh, I'm dating myself, but it's been the last, 28 years now that I've been working with all size companies. I created what's called a SIM system, S-I-M, S for strategy, I for implementation, and M for management. And what we're able to do is kind of the impossible, is to accelerate the growth of companies much faster than conventional methods and change the trajectory. So in other words, most companies want to grow maybe 10%, 50% per year. We have shown growth up to 2,000% per year. And I got tons of case studies and testimonials around that. So we have a very unique process. And so we're here to talk about branding and marketing.
Absolutely, and I think what you just said is a good kind of segue into the topic as a whole in terms of branding and how it's not just an external facing identity of your company, it's also part of the DNA of how you work. It's a lens in which you can use to filter decision making. It's a core set of values that is just as important externally and consumer facing as it is internally to your employees, to your corporate culture, again, how we think about making decisions, what we do, where we expand, et cetera. So we're going to dig into some of those topics, and I think you'll kind of hear a brand strategist and the marketer's perspective in that, but we'll also try to represent some other areas of the company as well in that. So I think, Howard, you're the right person to answer the first question that we have on our list, just talking about what is branding and why is it important to business strategy?
Yeah, so there's most people, even branding people that I meet, don't know what branding is. It's something that actually started when I was in design. I started graphic design back in the 80s, and then also took on advertising. And really, that's where it comes from. Design is about the aesthetics of how you're going to communicate, and then advertising is all about position. And back in the old days, there was two worlds. You either work with a design company or an advertising agency. And I fit in both worlds, so I ended up working with both and actually started to build brands before brand became a category. I used to call it image marketing. And this gal from New York says, oh, you're building brands. So the point being is that branding, the seed of it, is actually having a clear understanding of design. And that means you had to go to design school and understand the fundamentals of this theory behind color, for example, the use of typography, the use of space, to really engage, quote unquote, the consumer or the client, because graphic design, as part of being design in the area of branding, is all about how are you communicating emotionally. Why? Because we're human. That's why. And people don't buy until they feel something. And in advertising's focus is all about the positioning. Like, why is like the, a Nissan, quote unquote different than, let's say, Hyundai, even though they're in the same space more or less, right? Being an automotive and being more, economical, right? Versus a Ferrari, right? But it's all about the positioning. Advertising is all about the positioning. So what happened was it's really the combination of two. Now, to dive deeper, there's three major components when it comes to building a brand. There's the strategy, which is the positioning, and I call it the DNA. There's certain DNA components, as Carl was mentioning, for example, when it comes to the values, and really getting clear of your philosophy. So where companies run into a lot of problems is when they're chasing money without understanding why they're actually doing what they're doing. Like, why did they create that company to begin with? If you're about chasing money, that's not going to be the answer, especially when it comes to nowadays the different generations of how they actually their behaviors around companies. The younger generation, meaning millennials and the Z generation, they're all about voting with their dollars of companies that actually have a purpose, that actually have a reason why they exist. In the old days, in the 70s, because there were fewer companies, fewer products, and fewer services out there, it was okay to have not so much about your philosophy, but what are the features that you're offering to your customers, not the benefits, but the features. You guys getting this? So what happened over time, things started to evolve in a sense of branding, and what I call modern branding now, of what we contribute are some of the key components, which is what's your philosophy, what is your vision, meaning like what legacy you're leaving behind. You have to have a vision. I was working with Myler Butler, that's in the Bahamas, and Franklin is a grandson, is a granddaddy, which is Myler B. Butler, which is like the Governor General of the Bahamas. It was like being the President of the United States. They did not have their vision in stone. And so unfortunately, their company was deteriorating. It was a huge company. They owned shopping malls, they owned retail. But the point being is this, they were not clear over time of what they stood for, so the younger generation lost touch of who they were. So we came in and defined their vision, defined their philosophy, defined their values. What happened then, people were able to connect with them again. Does that make sense? You gotta be able to connect by having your vision, your philosophy, and values. And real quickly here, is everyone clear about like what are values? Okay, in a culture? Okay, do you mind? I want to make this where it's interactive. Can we get her a mic? I like it where it's more interactive, so we're not just talking, but we're having an actual rapport here. If you, right there, the gal in the yellow.
So values are really your compass. So it sets the guiding principles on how you're going to engage, operate. It's really your moral compass on how you're going to do everything that you do, from your own persona to your team, to your value partners, your clients, and your ecosystem. Everything that you're going to build is going to be dictated by those core values, your guiding principles.
Excellent. That was very good. That was very, very good. Yeah, when I was going to do, unfortunately, Tony Shea passed away, but I was going to do some work with him to rebrand, literally, Las Vegas, to downtown Las Vegas. Unfortunately, he passed away. The point being is this, you're exactly right. He was so clear of his company culture that as you went up the stairway to his office, which was on the same level as his workforce, so he believed that there wasn't a hierarchy, his values were actually literally, framed up in picture frames as you walk up the stairway, which I thought was absolutely brilliant to remind people what they stood for and who they are. So generally speaking, you want to have 5 values. A value, you're exactly right, it becomes the moral compass to the culture. A value could be like integrity, okay? Another one could be collaboration. Another one could be transparency. Another one could be hard work, like you're going to work hard. The point being is this, it's not just having the words, it's the leader displaying that leadership of the words. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so, by the way, this is a great way what we did with Myler Butler, for example, because there are a lot of people, unfortunately, not carrying the weight of the culture, that we actually had it with the HR department and the managers reciting, after we finished the value system, they started to recite the values to their quote-unquote managers and to the HR that people started to deselect themselves out of the organization because there weren't the same like-minded and like-hearted within the culture. Does that make sense? Because without that, man, it's like a bad marriage. You know, when you think about when you have a marriage, right? You got to have your values that you're very, quote unquote, in agreement with, and that becomes natural to have a great relationship at that point. So anyways, those are some of the key values when it comes to building a brand, and what is a brand is actually having an understanding, again, besides the vision, the philosophy, is what are going to be the values that drive, basically, quite honestly, it's all your stakeholders. That means also having a consumer and a customer aligned to the company's organization. And by the way, it's a much easier way when you have these values on your website, that now people, when they read the website and you're actually displaying it and consistent with that, you're going to be hiring more people that are better fit for your company. Okay? So that's just a part to branding, as far as branding the essence. Okay?
Yeah, and I think there's value in investing in that brand work, because there is an investment that goes along with that. Certainly there's investment of engaging an agency or engaging, you know, bringing internal stakeholders together to define that value, you know, your mission, vision, set of values. There's also kind of segueing into the marketing components of it. You know, I kind of define marketing as building that bridge between your brand and your customer, right? Figuring out how we articulate that brand. We now have something, you know, a vision, set of values on a piece of paper. How do we make that come to life in the customer journey? How do we make that come to life in our product strategy and make sure that customers know about it? There's investment that goes behind that. There's certain, you know, channels that are better suited for driving brand awareness than others. And so there is a decision making behind that, but I think there's a lot of value in what Howard just articulated. If you go through that exercise of clearly defining the brand, you now have a set of values, you have a lens, which can clearly communicate to your employees, to your internal stakeholders, to investors, right? There's a lot of different audiences where this brand shows up and comes to life. So one of the other questions that we had identified, Howard, was around, is branding essential for every type of business? You know, regardless of size, regardless of you know, industry. I've often gotten, you know, pushback from some of my B2B clients to say, do I really need to do that? Do I really need to invest in that? You know, we're a manufacturing company, we're a trucking company. You know, what's the power of brand? And those are interesting conversations to start to wade into. And I would say, yes, absolutely. Brand is important for all the reasons that we discussed, but I'm curious how this has come up for you as well, outside of maybe the kind of obvious B2C or D2C use cases.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of B2B companies, and you're right. They're, most of the time, I would say the highest percentage of the time, they're the most resistant, but they don't understand what branding is. Okay? If you have a business where B2C, B2G, which is business to government, or B2B, you're branding. The question becomes, are you branding effectively or ineffectively? Unfortunately, 95% of companies brand ineffectively because they don't understand the art and the science behind branding. Okay? That has to do with the name that you're putting out there. A lot of times we have to change people's companies' names because there's a limitation on the name itself. So if they're saying, hey, we're Nordstrom's, we're not Walmart, but their name sounds like Walmart, that right there is put a lid on a company's growth. Okay? And that doesn't matter, again, if you're B2C, B2G, or B2C. The point being, too, is for every industry, every category, and even new categories. It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 100 company. It all comes to three things. Basically, how are you framing your position of your company that differentiates from everybody else, okay, which is part of the value proposition. The second thing is, what kind of signal are you sending out there through your identity? The name, the tagline, the colors, the fonts, the salespeople. Is everything working in concert like a beautiful symphony, or is it punk rock? Okay, is the way to look at it. Is it flowing, and people start to recognize who you are? So again, it starts with the core of how you're positioning your brand and framing it that make it unique from everybody else. Let me give you a couple of tangible examples real quick. It's like I just like using FedEx. So FedEx, how they disrupted the industry is because the post office and still is known as being snail mail. Now here's the cool thing. there's brand identity, there's the brand positioning, the brand identity, and brand image. The brand image is what matters most. Guess who owns the brand image? The customer, the client, the consumer. They're the ones that are interpreting the signals that you're sending to them, or through social media, or what friends are saying, or what culture's saying, or what society is saying, and then they're making their own interpretation, even if it's true or not, of what they think about you. You see how powerful that is? Most people don't look at the customer's mindset, which is the psychology of how you're actually, what I call real estate in the mind, build the biggest, quote unquote, plot of land, okay, in their mind, so you become an instant recall in their mind of what you stand for and what difference you're gonna make with your product or service or information, okay? So branding literally is for every type of company. If you're not clear on brand, now again, this is an art form and it's a science. So if it's not your genius, it's not your job. It took me 15 years to master strategies. There's a lot to it. And it's 20 years when it comes to identity, which when it comes to brand identity, is an understanding of all media. We're not talking about just digital, by the way. We're talking about direct mail. We're talking about radio. We're talking about TV. We're talking about billboards. We're talking about product design, package designing. These are all, quote unquote, part of the identity of a company, okay? So yes, when it comes to branding, is it for all size businesses and every type of business in every category? Absolutely. And if you don't think so, it's because unfortunately you don't know, which is understandable, you don't know the art and the science behind branding, okay? The big companies do, and that's the reason why they became big. Steve Jobs was a natural brander. He understood it from the very beginning, quite honestly. But with most companies, unfortunately, and I say this, I've seen companies collapse because the CEO, the people that are running the company, when they come in, I've seen billion-dollar companies take a big jump and dump because they don't understand branding. I just give you a quick example, like Nordstrom's. Growing up, watching my mom, how she shopped at Nordstrom's, and you could return product that you're not, comfortable with, even though you might have worn it. You don't even need a receipt. Back then, you did not need a receipt. And then the kids took over the company, Nordstrom's, and they wanted to show proof, and they were all about the bottom line, not about the experience. The company almost tanked because, quote unquote, the philosophy, the vision, and the values were not written down to be as a succession from one legacy of the owner to the next, but they didn't understand branding. Okay, I've seen a lot, Enron. I've seen Enron tank, MCI. I get spot companies when they're in a tank because the CEO that moves in to making the core decision, he or her himself is not aligned to the brand. That's what almost happened with, remember Coke? The Coke test? Anyways, so yes, branding matters for every size business.
Yeah, something that I talk to some of my clients about is certainly during COVID, during the pandemic, if any of you like to shop online, like I do, if you're, looking at things on Instagram, fashion, jewelry, any sort of D2C brand, there was an explosion of direct-to-consumer brands in that period, right? Consumer shopping was on the rise. We were all looking for something to do, a distraction. There were a lot of companies out there that for a period of time could be successful without a brand, right? They had a product, it was priced right, and they had a good distribution engine. And certainly with third-party selling on Amazon, yeah, you can get a product, you can manufacture a product, you can list it on Amazon, you can make money. But then what happens over time, right? What the brand helps to do is to really establish a relationship with your customers so that you are less sensitive to their price sensitivity over time. They have now ascribed a different value to your product that is not just based on price, or makes your brand, your company less susceptible to competitive pressures in the marketplace because you have something that resonates with your potential consumers. So, that's an example that's specific to e-commerce, but there are applications to that in other industries as well. And some of the conversations that I've had, particularly with B2B clients, is really looking at the competitive landscape and starting to look across the horizon and saying, yes, you may have great relationships with your customers and you've been able to be successful through, your sales organization. For example, over time, let's look at the competitive marketplace. Let's look at some of the competitive pressures. And, certainly we all know that with, a rise of channels, a rise of AI, search engine results are changing. Like the whole landscape, the whole game is changing, and it is going to be harder and harder to break through. And so having a clear story, I like to say, your brand, there's the visual identity components of it, but it's storytelling too, and storytelling resonates with people, and that's a great way to cut through in that space.
Yeah, I love what she's saying. By the way, she's a genius in marketing, and then we're, our space is in business development and the branding. And here's the thing, branding comes first before marketing, because branding is about building that identity that you want to be identified by. Okay? So it happens a lot of times, people get mistaken where they think it's one and the same, and they're completely different, but yet they totally complement one another. So the world-class brands are where they have a clear identity of who they are, what they stand for, what makes them unique. And a marketing job and PR job is to promote that brand. Does that make sense? Okay? I run into a lot of companies that are doing, like marketing companies that think they're doing branding, and branding companies that think they're doing marketing. They're not even clear of the roles. And there's so much to know in these two spaces, by the way. So I love what you were just saying too. When it comes to understanding the price point, I'm going to back that up a little bit too from my perspective. There's only two ways you can build a brand. Price-driven, quality-value-driven. That's it. Here's the secret. If you're going to be based on price, you're going to be beaten up to pulp. Because now it's based on volume of selling that product, that service, or information at its least amount of margin. Everything else has to be quality driven, and that's why even more the brand needs to stand out to show how you differentiate your product, your service, your information from everybody else. Now, why is this important more than ever before? Exactly what Clara was pointing out. There's more products and service than ever before that's in the marketplace. I mean, growing up, and there usually, what is it? There was like 10 cereals on a shelf. Now there's like hundreds. And then now you're looking at the energy drinks. It's all about positioning, and it's all about being consistent about your position, about delivering now what's called brand promise. So as Cara does her genius, promoting that brand and saying the brand does X, Y, and Z, you better believe it that the brand better do X, Y, and Z, because if it doesn't land properly as an experience to the consumer or the customer, guess what? It's going to have what's called a negative impact on the brand, which is called equity. There's two types of equity when it comes to brand equity. It's going to build up the brand equity, which is your reputation, or negative equity will actually diminish the value of your company in your market space. And these all have reflections on the actual revenue of your company. This is how the stock market works, by the way. It's based on projections, based on our brand recognition and brand equity, okay? And that's what moves the needle when it comes to figuring out the PE ratio of, quote unquote, that position of that brand.
I'm sure we've all had the experience where you interact with a product or service, maybe you have a couple questions, you reach out to customer service, and then it all breaks down. Yeah. And I don't want to pick on customer service. There's a lot of other pieces in that, right? But to the topic of aligning product and purpose and having your brand vision, your mission, your core set of values, and making sure that is articulated to every stakeholder in the business that will touch the customer experience or impact the customer experience. And some of that's behind the scenes, right? As a marketer, especially in my corporate roles, I always thought about marketing as kind of this hub and spoke model. If you think about a wheel, marketing was often in the middle, right? Because sometimes we're like the last mile before that, consumer-facing campaign or collateral goes out the door and touches the consumer. But in order to bring that together, we have to work with all of the different spokes in the business. We might have to work with legal or business development or the creative team or the brand team. So many different stakeholders to bring that to life. And having that guiding set of brand values which is based on the vision, which should also be rooted in the business's core objectives and financial objectives and where that business needs to go. There needs to be alignment in those things, and that needs to be clearly articulated to all of those stakeholders to make sure that the process doesn't break down for the customer. And that happens in a lot of different areas. And so let's talk maybe about what some of the keys are behind that.
I love what you're saying. So she's absolutely correct. So that's why I was saying we do the strategic planning, which is the business modeling. And you're exactly right. It's to create the alignment with the brand. And exactly what you're saying when it comes to stakeholders. By the way, stakeholder is basically anyone that's to be connected to your business. Customers, investors, the media, employees, okay, prospects, okay? These are all stakeholders. They're gonna be in the present and into the future, and based on how much you wanna grow and basically how much you wanna dominate the market, it's gonna have a true impact, negative or positive, of what stakeholders you want in your universe to be a magnet versus being repelling them, okay? So exactly what you're saying, when we work with clients, when we get into a strategy, it's usually about 2 to 3 days long, is looking at exactly what you said, is the customer journey. What is the customer journey when it comes to actually being a prospect to a customer to an actually recurring customer? And that's where the goal is where you could actually have a recurring customer, so therefore the efforts of marketing and promotion and PR are lessened to that one specific customer because they become loyal. So the name of the game is, how do you create loyal customers and clients? And there is a system to it where they're actually so loyal they do not want to switch brands. Okay? It's harder to do now, right? But it is definitely doable. Like look at Apple, for example. Okay, I've been an Apple fan from the very beginning. That's actually what helped me create my business. But I've been so loyal to them. I was one of those people that stood in line for 8 hours to get the first iPhone. But anyways, the point being is this, is that they keep delivering over and over again what my expectations are about my experiences that I've had. And that could crumble overnight, by the way, like hotels. Quite honestly, I've been in a couple of hotels lately where the customer service has not been up to par, and I'm going, wait, why am I paying this amount still if I'm not receiving the same customer experience that I'm used to? I may want to jump ship and change to another brand that actually is more consistent to quote unquote my quote unquote way of doing business and what would work for me as an overall experience.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that is kind of the next layer or the next lens to apply is the importance of that in terms of your employees and employee retention too, and how your employees are bought into the mission and vision of the company, right? Because that's equally important. And we talked about kind of the role that all the stakeholders play in the customer journey, but it also helps to have those guiding forces to make sure we understand, what are we focused on? Are we all running in the same direction? Do I feel connected to the mission of this company? Am I, as an employee, going to be more loyal as a result as well? So I think kind of seeing just the harmony between all of these things and the role that having a very clearly articulated brand position can play in that is really important. Just to kind of underscore the fact that, you know, brand isn't vanity. Yes, there's the visual components of it, but to me, other ways to refer to brand, just reputation, right?
Exactly.
Other words that we can plug in there, consistency, right? You hit on the consistency piece and kind of thinking about the value that that brings externally to your consumers and internally to your employees as well is key.
Yeah, exactly. It fits in two camps, tangible and intangible. The tangible is how you could see something. It's like, think of it like a person. Think of it like the brand. If a logo is done right, I don't even call it a logo. I create a new category, which is a brand mark. A brand mark is symbolic, and it will last it's universal, and it should last forever. Okay, like the Nike swoosh, or let's say the Apple. It's done, and it's chiseled down to a beautiful piece. It's complicated to make something simple. To design the brand mark, like in the Apple, okay, was one of the most famous designers of all time to design that, but it's very complex to make something so genius, so simple, as something that's so universal, that's timeless. That's basically all of Apple's products is based on timeless. That's why it's based on a simplest form. Most people don't even realize that. Most companies like Samsung and all those other companies that copy Apple don't even know why they're copying Apple. This is Apple's philosophy, is simplicity. Steve Jobs was an absolute genius and a natural brander, by the way. But the point being is that when it comes to employees now, you're absolutely correct. So a lot of times when I'm working with companies, they're like, we can't keep our employees. I say, why do you think you can't keep your employees? And I say, do you have a vision? No. Do you have a philosophy? No. Do you have values? No. But they should know who we are. I said, no. So these things have to be put down where they're actually in what I call a brand manual, where the people that matter the most in a business are the people. And the only way that they're going to get to know who you are is that you're going to be very clear on your vision. So I remember I did a strategy session, and I just didn't pull this into actual real situations. With WSS, I don't know if you heard of WSS, but they couldn't grow out of the urban area. They've been around at the time for 25 years. They've never been able to grow out of the urban areas of Los Angeles, and they wanted to go nationwide, okay? And it was during the recession, by the way, and they said, Eric goes, you know what? I would start to ask a question and to start to articulate what their vision is by asking a line of questions, quality questions, to get quality answers from Eric as far as what will form the vision. And then the next step was to form the philosophy. The next step was to form the value systems. I kid you not, I had to work with, I think it was 7 of their VPs. At the end of the first day, because they thought it was just going to be another strategy session and waste their time, they all thanked me at the end of the day. It wasn't about me. It's because they understood now where the CEO wanted to take the company after 25 years. Make a long story short, we redesigned the 52 retail stores. We grew them in 5 years to over 100 stores nationwide, and we reached over $1 billion. That's what brand clarity can do for a business. And that was a company that was sinking. Can you imagine if you're humming along and you just have what I call a lid to the company and you want to grow and you just don't know how to scale, but you have the actual ingredients, you just don't know how to arrange the ingredients, so it's like music to the ears. Does that make sense? Okay? So I see so many great products, so many great services. The problem is that you got the greatest thing on planet Earth, is that all, quote unquote, all your ingredients of who you are buried underneath the soil, and they need to be brought up to the surface and shine and polished like from coals to diamonds. So now people understand your value and the value you're bringing to them. And by the way, now you're able to charge what you really deserve to charge. Does that make sense? Okay? Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, yes.
Absolutely. And I think maybe we're running up on time, but maybe
Okay.
the last piece that I'll add to that is the vision is a really important piece of that, because the vision is future looking. And as we talk about aligning product and purpose, product development is in the here and now, but also into the future, right? And kind of depending on how your organization looks at product development or service development, you may be thinking, 6, 12, 24 months down the road. And having that clearly articulated vision in terms of what are the problems that we're solving today? How does that align with our core customer? How does that align with our mission? But where do we see this mission evolving into the future as well? That's a critically important thing to communicate to internal teams as they're thinking about their product roadmap, how they attack opportunities, right? There could be things like partnership opportunities, right? Which some of them are, we're talking 6 months down the road, there's a larger scale partnership opportunity we're looking at. How does that fit into your company's vision? And where do you want to take it in the future? So there's a lot, I think what we've communicated here today is there's just a lot of ramifications to this work. And so if you are contemplating really digging into articulating your brand, your value proposition, whether it be for a service, whether it be for a product, or just trying to sit down and kind of articulate your value proposition and your set of values to even guide yourself in terms of where do we go from here. That's kind of the crux of what we wanted to share here today.
Yeah, and by the way, I have up on a screen our information, and Cara has an offer, and then I have an offer. With my offer is I charge $2,500 when I do these assessments that are hour long to figure out what is the thing that you're not seeing? What is it that you don't know, and what is your blind spot. So I go through and I tear apart in a very gentle way your name of your company, your logo, your tagline, your website, your social media, everything you're trying to communicate to your target market. But I always start off with talking with you first to understand what's making you unique, your product unique, and then I look at the misalignment. And I do it on Zoom, it's an hour long, and I mark up everything, and the whole thing's recorded. So you go back to your team and make these changes. And I've had massive transformation just doing this one exercise. So every time I work with a client, the first thing I always start with is an assessment. It's kind of like going to a doctor. You have to go through the blood panels to figure out unbiasedly, okay, what's going on and what you think is so and what's actually so, okay? So what I usually do is charge $2,500, but it's $500 today. And then I have the QR code, and I'll take you to the application of the credit card form, plus I have forms with me as well. And the important thing to do, if you do sign up online, and you look at howcreative.com/assessment, that's all information's there if you want to take a photo, you have to put in the coupon HOW, how, and hit the button apply, and it'll reduce it from $2,500 to $500. Okay, so now you have the inside secret of how people get it for $500. And then I invite your entire team to be on the phone call, by the way. They'll all learn something, whether it's the HR, whether it's operations, whether it's the CO, CFO, your marketing, CMO. Everybody starts to get a better understanding about what the brand is really and what is the gap between where you're at, where you want to go, and I'll give you insight to actually take away, to actually improve your brand immediately. That's worth thousands of dollars. So I just want to say I'm just offering that to make myself more accessible while I'm reducing it, why I am here. And Cara has an offer as well.
Yeah, just quickly, what I like to do is kind of the part two of that, so it dovetails nicely. I like to work with folks once they've articulated the brand. What do we do with it? How do we communicate it to our customers? How does that start to spur the flywheel of our creative strategy, of our content strategy, of our channel plan? When is the right time to be investing in paid marketing channels or building up our organic channel strategy? So I love working with folks that are articulating their brand strategy and making sure they have that mission, vision, set of values, and purpose that's clearly aligned with their target consumer. And then I like to take that one step further. So if you're interested or just want to reach out and chat about it further, I work with folks in a marketing advisory capacity, so would love to hear from you. But otherwise, thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for your time.